Connecting from a previous video, Pseudoskeptics, Debunking Anything. Part 1. Essentially we are all Pavloved by the education system into obedience, providing numerous, automatic, thoughtless, reflexive answers. It's the only way to succeed. To get through the system. Of course most people, on leaving school, take its teachings less seriously, as the years go by, and may happily dabble in seemingly illogical things, spiced with delicious uncertainty, like alternative medicine, and fortune tellers, reincarnation, etc. But clearly not the pseudo-skeptics, desperately afraid and angered by uncertainty. They defend their Pavlov school programming, vociferously, most notably online, with aggressive, offensive denialism. So, carrying on the thesis from the video Pseudoskeptics Debunking Anything Part 1. Thus, we reiterate the question, are pseudoskeptics, ranty subscribers, the militant Darwinist atheists, tormenting Christians online, etc., just people Pavloved beyond recovery, into utter obedience to their school programming, Pavloved for life, by the imperfect education system, and so far deprived of a personal psychic experience? Because according to Sheldrake, a personal psychic experience is vital to anyone believing in telepathy, not scientific evidence. That only permissions people to believe, to confirm their personal psychic experiences are genuine, and to admit them publicly. It also explains why the great majority of people believe in telepathy, because they have all experienced it. But it's a taboo, thus seldom talked about. Example, do you talk to anyone about your dreams? Has anyone ever asked you? Likely not. That's a taboo. Now, also, no doubt, you have encountered people physically grown to adulthood, yet still retaining some infantile personality characteristics. Normally it's okay, and quite harmless, only amusing, if an adult is irrationally afraid of the dark, afraid to be by themselves, outraged if they don't get a fair share of the chocolate bar, etc. We observe infantile tantrum behavior in supermarkets, where infants practice passive aggression, and refuse to move, laying on the floor, screaming, or holding their breath, etc., until they get some concession from a parent, often accompanied by great emotional displays. Do you know they should grow out of it, given enough time? But, dear reader, you have also met seemingly mature adult people, who drive cars, operate computers competently, etc., who occasionally, or habitually, display these infantile behaviors, suggesting they are not completely grown up mentally, like most average people. Online behaviors of adult pseudoskeptics often strongly suggest an inner, angry, raging child at the keyboard. Okay, some people are slow to grow up and we must endure their infantile behaviors, while they torment others so needlessly. So that's online trolls. But what would you say if a 60-year-old professor, with a long academic record, publicly displays infantile passive aggression toward an innocuous subject, like harmless telepathy, refuses to look at evidence in front of himself at a presentation, looks sideways, into the distance, to be as awkward as possible, while insisting there is no evidence, so what's he looking away from? This infantile passive-aggressive behavior is manifested by self-appointed vigilante notables, named by Rupert Sheldrake, in the following clip, and is highly representative of many pseudoskeptics, in vast numbers, online. Sheldrake describes some public domain notables, from personally knowing them, and each displays an emotional block that prevents them from calmly evaluating evidence, like average people do. To these three influential individuals, telepathy is seen as a red flag, waving edible, causing an out-of-control, infantile, irrational anger response, and brain shutdown. A tantrum. What is effectively a lifelong, diagnosable, learning disability from childhood. Three professors are noted by Sheldrake as representative of the pseudoskeptic social phenomenon: Professor Peter Atkins, Professor Peter Wolpert, Professor Richard Dawkins, of God Delusion fame.
I have to say that most skeptics, there are some very reasonable skeptics and well-informed skeptics. One of them is Chris French, who's also been supported by the Perrott Warwick Fund. But some of them are not very well-informed. During the controversy in the Times and elsewhere that occurred after the British Association meeting that Bernard Carr referred to at the beginning of this gathering. I was denounced by Professor Peter Atkins, who's a leading skeptic at Oxford, a chemist, saying that the British Association should never have allowed anyone to talk about this pseudo-scientific topic. And then I was asked to take part in an interview with him on BBC Radio 5. He said in the Times, as you see at the top, no reason to suppose that telepathy is anything other than a charlatan's fantasy. In the discussion on Radio 5, I said to him, Professor Atkins, have you actually looked at the evidence? He said, no, of course not. I said, why not? He said, well, if I did, he said, I'd be very, very suspicious of it. And I said, there's a word for that. It's called prejudice. He simply didn't know. He was prepared to stand up in public to the entire nation and announce that it was a fantasy, there was nothing in complete ignorance. Now, how is that possible? Not one of us could stand up and denounce modern research in quantum physics or radio astronomy with complete absence of any information at all. But when it comes to telepathy, a surprisingly large number of otherwise intelligent people feel that they have the right to pronounce in a state of ignorance. Professor Lewis Wolpert appeared denouncing my research on a TV show. The people asked him in advance if he'd like to see the tapes of the experiments before he commented on them, and he said no, absolutely no need, and then said what you read there. There's no evidence for any person, animal or thing being telepathic. I challenged him to a public debate at the Royal Society of Arts, which happened a few years ago with a judge in the chair. It was written up in Nature, and it was perfectly clear he knew nothing of the evidence. And he didn't want to know it either, because in the lecture, while I was showing the evidence on the screen, he sat at a table tapping a pencil, looking bored, staring into the distance, and didn't turn around to look at the evidence behind him. And Professor Richard Dawkins, who until recently was Professor of Public Understanding of Science, came to interview me for his recent TV series called Enemies of Reason, a sequel to his program on religion called The Root of All Evil. I made it a condition of seeing him for this program that it was a discussion about evidence. I said I wasn't interested in taking part in another of his low-grade debunking programs. So they said, yes, it was about evidence, it would be completely fair, he was really interested in hearing the evidence and so forth. So I agreed to it. He came to see me. And when he arrived, after a bit of preliminary banter and him saying how this was just wishful thinking, I said, well, look, we've met to discuss the evidence, why don't we do that? He said, I don't want to discuss the evidence. And I said, why not? He said, it's too hard, it's too difficult. I said, most people can understand it. He said, we haven't time. I said, it only takes a few minutes. He said, anyway, it's not what this program's about. And I said, oh, really? I said, I thought I'd made it clear I didn't want to take part in another low-grade debunking program. It's not a low-grade debunking program, it's a high-grade debunking program. The director then said, cut, and I asked him if it was true. He said, yes, it was another Dawkins polemic. He didn't tell me when they asked me to take part that I was going to be portrayed as an enemy of reason for doing research in this field. But it is extraordinary, the passions that this subject can arouse in the minds of people who claim to be on the side of science, reason and evidence. I'm sure everybody in this room has encountered skeptics of that kind. I think one of the reasons for the fear, as I said at the beginning, is that if telepathy exists, it would lead to an overthrow of science as we know it, turn the laws of nature upside down and so forth. I don't think it would. The development of Max Faraday's work on electromagnetism and Maxwell's equations didn't destroy the whole of Newtonian physics, it added to it. And I think that admitting the existence of telepathy as a natural feature of animal communication would enlarge here in Trinity. The final point I'd like to make is this. All around the world, telepathic phenomena and other psychic phenomena like premonitions are taken for granted in traditional societies.
Sheldrake's summary reveals grown men, with apparently distinguished public careers, behaving like infants, throwing tantrums, spitting the dummy, and wailing, when confronted with harmless telepathy that most other people happily accept, as they have personal experiences that confirm Sheldrake's evidence. Sheldrake points out their irrational reactions to a mundane thing. Conclusion: these prominent people, pseudoskeptics, have learning disabilities from childhood that they can never escape. Their disability is widespread, say, like Asperger's, a type of autism, and shows up online in many thousands of individuals rancorously disputing the paranormal with evidence-free diatribes and permanent belligerence toward Christians, thinking they need to be cyberbullied into being more like their verbally violent skeptic opponents. No pseudo-skeptic can admit they just have a cruel streak and want to batter others with infantile verbal violence. Yes, it's a brain development problem. So something didn't develop, didn't flower at the right time. An incomplete physical brain is the result. In the angry, unhappy adult, the pseudo-skeptics, the Wolpers, the Wisemans, the Shermers, the Randys, the Dawkins. And this next section is based on a serious brain development book, The Brain That Changes Itself by Dr. Norman Boyd, MD, subtitled Stories of Personal Triumph from the Frontiers of Brain Science. It has an extensive index of hundreds of peer-reviewed, cutting-edge brain science papers, mainly based on brain scans. Brain plasticity is the reason that young children can learn many languages. The infant brain has basically a photographic memory that recalls everything, because so far, the brain doesn't know what to include or exclude. So everything is memorized. Around age 12, children's brains normally alter. They cease to be sponges, obediently accepting everything they are told, and begin to reject a few things. A tiny rebellion has begun. The journey to adulthood, meaning they are drawing boundaries, drawing their own personalities, resisting, vetting, the information deluge around them. It's the beginning of their self-identity, of adulthood. They take some things with a grain of salt as the years progress. Some things are put on probation, under suspicion, but retained by curiosity in the person's memory, pending further evidence. This is all done by normal average people, who grow up, have occasional psychic experiences, or know someone who does, and happily put the events on probation, in memory, until someone like Rupert Sheldrake presents scientific evidence, confirming their probationary psychic belief. This is a wonderfully smooth, pleasing experience. This confirmation, aha! It happens many times in the life of the average person. But this is not the case for the pseudo-skeptic. Due to some defect, the child's brain does not start the maturing process by resisting some information around age 12. There is no tiny rebellion, and the journey to mental adulthood is not commenced. The child continues naively believing everything he is told by the system, turning out to be a robot, just repeating everything he is told, so obediently, and clinging to that school learning for the rest of his life. Apparently Pavloved permanently into total obedience. They virtually never learn anything new, lacking vital curiosity after they leave school, we notice online. And they have a poor understanding of what they learned at school. Their learning disabilities seem rife among them online. Even admitted by Dawkins to Sheldrake, evidence is too hard, the obvious non-maturing is due to some defect in brain chemistry. Lacking vital curiosity is why they don't retain anomalous information, like psychic phenomena, putting stuff on hold, in memory. Instead, anomalies are angrily rejected and denied. And telepathy is a society taboo, according to Dr. Dean Radin, to which pseudo-skeptics adhere with their total obedience. That is likely a physical brain defect. Wrongly developed amygdala, or something. And this physical brain defect is widely manifested by the many angry infantile antics of pseudo-skeptics, online, and in the public arena. As noted by Susan Blackmore, pseudo-skeptic herself. They are all men, and they display such regimented lockstep irrational behaviors, while posing as scientists, suggests the non-maturation brain defect is widespread. Much of this described mass behavior is well catalogued at debunking skeptics.com. Its board includes a Nobel Prize winner,